So Holly Holmes has a co-main event, or is the co-main event, versus Stephanie Hahn. Now, when we speak about Holly Holmes, it's important to recognize that she was a great female boxer. She was a multiple world champion and had a lot of credibility in the boxing space. And you could argue quite convincingly that she's a top 10 female boxer of all time. Now, my reflection or my memories of Holly Holm is when she fought Ronda Rousey. Now, it's important to remember that Ronda Rousey in the UFC, now this was a UFC fight, and it was a title fight, and Ronda Rousey was seen as an elite champion. She was seen as a dominant champion. And I remember she was beating her opponents primarily with arm bars. So she was like breaking people's arms, and she was feared. And I remember wanting Holly Holmes to win the fight so badly. I really wanted Holly Holmes to win because I knew about her boxing background, and I was really hoping for a victory, hoping that she could pull it off. And I remember people just underestimating her and not really taking into account her boxing ability, which turned out to be significant. And the funny thing about that fight was the cultural impact of that victory. That victory had a significant cultural impact. And it was almost like that UFC victory that made her a champion had casual fans explore her boxing history. Now, the reason why maybe a lot of people didn't know that Holly Holmes was a female boxing champion and a great boxing champion was that female boxing at the time didn't have the limelight that it has now. So that's an important distinction to make. But that Ronda Rousey victory for me I was so happy for her that she had that victory. So now we approach a stage where she's not in the UFC anymore, and now she's in the later stages of her boxing career. So I was watching one of the, what's it called, the documentaries that was documenting her camp. And what I would say is, obviously a boxer is going to talk positively in camp. I mean, it's very important to have a positive psychology. So even if they're not having a good camp, they're not going to admit it pre-fight. But she did look very strong in her camp. She was quite muscular and really, really strong. So as I've stated, Holly Holm looks really strong in camp. She looks physically very strong. And she wasn't known in her prime as a power puncher, but she looks like she's carrying more power now. And her trainer made reference to that now she's more powerful. So it's going to be interesting to see if the visual imagery of her looking stronger translates to actual greater power punching in the ring. Now, as I've stated, Holly Holm was a significant force in female boxing when there was less interest in female boxing, when there was less interest in female boxing by casual fans, and let's be honest, by boxing fans. However, the MVP machine, that production company, is putting a lot of attention onto female boxing. You could make an argument, and I think it would be quite a compelling argument, that Jake Paul's greatest contribution to boxing is the marketing of female boxing. And an example of this is because the Serrano and Katie Taylor fight was, I believe it was the supporting main event to the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight, that meant 60 million people potentially watched that fight. So they are putting massive attention on female boxing. And that can only be a good thing, because that gives an opportunity to pique interest not only within the boxing circles, but also within the casual boxing fan circles, and also within just casual fans in general. It will allow female boxers to make more money, to have more visibility, to build their brands. And by building their brands, they can create moments that can interest the public. And that's significant, and that's what female boxing needs if it's going to continue to prosper. So I would argue that female boxing needs more culturally defining moments. It needs big, massive headlining events. And Holly Holmes is not only a credible brand because of her boxing background and her UFC championship status, but she also has cultural significance because of the Ronda Rousey fight. Again, it's important to highlight that if you have a significant cultural moment, it can be predicated on many things. But in that fight, the reason why it was such a significant cultural moment was because Ronda Rousey was seen as an elite champion. Anyway, what about her opponent? Well, her opponent, Holly Holm's opponent, Stephanie Hahn, is a champion. She's holding the WBA title. Now, I had a brief look at her fights. Looks like what she does, she keeps her left hand moving, so she uses it as a feint. Looks like her main preference is to punch straight. And she also has a style where she tries to walk you in onto the punches, and she likes to move from side to side as opposed to moving forward. Also in the fight that I watched, she actually came back from a first round knockdown. So that shows composure and that shows heart. However, it was a flash knockdown. It wasn't like a knockdown where she was like really badly hurt. She was more knocked off balance. But still, she showed composure to come back. She isn't known for her power. So she's not a massive power puncher. But she is a champion. She does have experience. However, look, from an outsider looking in, it looks like that Holly Holm has the edge in power and will have the edge in experience. And I think she'll have a significant edge in experience because she's been a multiple champion at the boxing level, but also she had huge fights, particularly on the UFC stage. Now, I know UFC isn't boxing, but she's fought at the high level on the big stages in the UFC and in the big stages in boxing. Yes, it was a little bit different because when she was boxing, there wasn't as much as an emphasis on female boxing at the time, but she has experience under the bright lights, so I will give her an edge in that. Also, her southpaw style gives her a slight edge as well. However, the caveat to that is obviously a champion is not going to surrender their belt easily, so there will be resistance. The psychology of a champion, she's going to want to keep that belt. And Holly Holm's age of 44, it could be a significant factor. But this should be an entertaining fight. It will probably be a fight that will go the distance, unless, if Holly Holm has developed this new power, maybe that could be a factor later in the fight. But I think looking at it from side to side, you'd give Holly Holm a slight edge, and it would be great to see her capture one of the titles and have, not only just get a title, but then, be able to create some great cultural moments in boxing, because she definitely deserves it. I also wanted to mention that Serrano is fighting as well, and she's actually headlining the event. Serrano is really important to female boxing because she has built her brand under MVP Promotions. She has great credibility. She has provided elite entertainment. Her fights with Katie Taylor were top draw. They had good marketing, but they also had, it wasn't just a great marketed event. It was actually a great fight. They had a sequence of fights. They had a trilogy. So she's provided the entertainment and she has made good money. So she's definitely an advocate for female boxing. So that should be an interesting fight. I think it's really important, and I just want to re-emphasize this. It's important that female boxing creates cultural moments. And when I say cultural moments, you're thinking about, the Evander Holyfield versus Tyson. That was a cultural moment. Recently, Crawford versus Canelo. That was a massive cultural moment. So to me, cultural moments is about building brands. It's about telling stories. And then it's about having great fights. You have to have all of those elements primarily. And sometimes I actually think to myself, imagine if Chrissy Martin was fighting today. She would have been a bigger star. And for reference, check out Chrissy Martin's knockout on the Mike Tyson Holyfield undercard. She was really powerful. She had something that was rare, which was that knockout power, and she was ruthless. But she would be a massive star today. But the important point here is that within female boxing, there needs to be harnessing more stars, and we need more significant fights. And within those fights, we need those magical moments. And that can stimulate the boxing fans and stimulate the casual fans. And that's important if there's going to be an evolution of female boxing. So the chapter of MVP and female boxing is a very important one.